What's the most terrifying thing you've seen in real life? I saw a car crash as a child. My dad stopped the car to go help. He made me stay in the car, but I saw one body on the ground that started to gain a puddle of blood around it, and another body handing out a window of one of the cars involved in the accident. Blood, glass, and car chunks were everywhere. Horns were honking, heard a lot of screaming. My dad came walking back to the car shortly after he got out. I asked what happened. He said there was nothing he could do, pulled into a parking lot, and waited for cops to come. I remember being impressed by how fast the firefighters cleaned everything up. You would think seeing the bodies would stick with me, but what stuck with me was the pale dead look on my dad when he came back to me. Sometimes your best intentions can do anything, and I could tell it got to him. I saw a 5-year-old girl fall about 30 feet from a chairlift while skiing. When she landed, I was about 15 feet away. She landed on her stomach. I called ski patrol immediately, but the time it took them to get there felt like an eternity. It was probably not more than 5 minutes. I had no medical training other than very basic do not move the injured person. Since her face was directly in the snow, I took my jacket off and I held her neck head still and had a nearby person slide my jacket under her face. It was shortly after Christmas, so I tried to distract her by asking her what she got from Santa, and I sang her favorite Christmas song. I kept holding her neck still until ski patrol took over and sent her in the ambulance. Later, I found out that although she had some bad bruising, she walked out of the ER later that day. When I was 17, I still lived at my mom's house. We were in a middle-class neighborhood, so it wasn't necessarily a bad area for the most part. I was taking out the garbage one night as the sun had just gone down. I walked the first garbage can out and these two men were arguing across the street. I walked back and got the second one. When I turned around, one of the men lifted a gun and shot the other in the head point blank. The man with the gun stared directly at me, then turned and fled. I was surprisingly calm about it until I was on the phone to the police. Then suddenly I started freaking out and panicking. As far as I know, they never caught the guy. Second plane hit the WTC, out my 35th floor office window about half-mile away. The first one happened behind me and I guess I didn't hear it, but then someone called me and I was looking out the window at the smoke and the papers floating everywhere. I still thought it was some small plane accident, and I couldn't see the hole because it was on the other side. I was wondering if it was caught on video and picturing what the crash would look like in my head when the second one hit right in front of me, on the side facing me. It slid in like a coin into a slot, and after a moment a ball of flame shot out in various directions, and a moment after that my window shook. It looked just like I was picturing the first one in my head at that moment, and my mental gears turned for a full 10 seconds wondering how my eyes just showed me what I was picturing. It wasn't until someone ran into my office asking what happened and I heard myself tell them that I realized it. I walked down 35 flights, walked miles home to Brooklyn, watched the second one fall on TV, then found my wife and toddler daughter at a gym class, and immersed myself in my daughter's world where this didn't happen. We pulled up beside a captain in the army who was covered in blood. He was shaking and asking if we would help him because everyone in the Humvee was dead except him. They were working with Iraqi army and hit an IED while doing a movement. We explained to him we specifically came out there to help him and he just wouldn't stop thanking us. It was obvious he was in complete and utter shock. He was the only survivor in that truck. Christmas Day. I worked at a gas station when I was 18. One night, at the end of my shift, the graveyard guy just didn't show up. I called my sister to see if she would hang out with me until I could get a hold of someone. At about 4 a.m., an ambulance slowed down right in front of the station. As it came to a stop at the light, the back doors opened up and a guy jumped out. One paramedic hopped out of the back, chasing after him. The guy ran right up to the station, looking terrified. He turned to the left to run again, and we noticed that his head was missing a big chunk in the back, blood all down him. Medic continued to pursue him through the parking lot next door. We called 911 and explained the situation. Dispatch responded, "Yeah, right." About 20 minutes later, police arrived to take a statement from us. Guy was high and injured, trying to get away. I don't know if they ever caught up with him again. Waking up totally covered in blood. I was walking to class and got hit by a car. I'm not sure what was happened in the moments leading up to it, but I woke up in the middle of the road, cradling my head. I distinctly remember lifting my head and looking at my blood-covered arm, thinking I'll deal with that later, and putting my arm back under my head and going back to sleep. I turned out pretty okay, but I genuinely think the accident made me dumber. My grades slipped hard after the event. I live in northern BC, Canada, and I was going for a run through some rural roads around my house. I turned a corner and immediately ran into a moose, with her calf behind her. Now for anyone who doesn't know, moose are actually freaking huge and not scared of humans. They will stomp you to death just because they feel like it, let alone when they are actually protecting their young. In this case, I was literally less than 10 feet away from it. I was lucky in that it just stood its ground and glared at me, never breaking eye contact, so I was able to back away slowly, and cut my run short and go home. If I took one step closer, there is a very real chance it could have attacked and I probably wouldn't be here today. A trailer load of pigs that the tailgate opened while traveling down a road. Those poor piggies just tumbling out the back of this trailer, breaking legs, skidding along the road. They didn't scream. The silence made it much more disturbing. They just sat there, legs splayed, road rash oozing blood, and they just sat like they were in shock. Suicide Jumper was pretty unnerving. He fell from several stories up and landed on the curb. His body was rigid for a second, then just kinda melted around the shape of the curb, then blood. Unsettling. As a young lad, I saw a man on a ninja-style bike wreck into a telephone pole at 100+ mph. I was the first person and I went to him and he was crying and his jaw was hanging off and all of his teeth were missing. I went for help and called 911 and went back to where he was laying, but he was dead. Worked as a healthcare security officer in a rather large locked psychiatric ward. One day I was leaving dispatch and happened to catch on our old black and white monitor a man sitting in the middle of the main floor. Something struck me as wrong. Suddenly I saw a black puddle beginning to form under the man. I go running up to the unit, and there sat a man in a puddle of blood. I called for backup, but he stood up and ran at me. I fought this guy for about 5 minutes, both of us covered in blood. His eyes were dead, like a shark's. Turns out he had sat in the floor and ripped out the stitches the ear had put in after a suicide attempt. A 12-year-old's beating heart and breathing lungs. He blew his chest wall out with a 20-gauge shotgun from a distance of 8 feet. He propped the gun against a fence post to cross the fence. The gun fell and went off. He was hunting. He was shot in self-defense. Catching a mad-out young woman rummaging through tools in my dad's garage. The face she gave me when she realized a larger male had confronted her in a confined space was one of pure terror, and she was ready to claw my eyes out to survive what she most likely perceived as a threat. When she turned to run out of the garage, my police officer dad caught her by the arm and held her down until the police arrived. Watching her fight, beg, and plead that we won't rape her or kidnap her was pretty heartbreaking when we had the best intentions in mind of getting professionals to handle her drug-infused meltdown. The struggle was strong enough that we decided we should handcuff her to keep her from hurting herself or us. Come to find out later, she was on the run and being chased by police because she thought she was being chased and in danger of being kidnapped inside of a hotel. We were her worst nightmare in her mind, and it sure as hell looked like it. When I was younger, I kicked a ball over the fence of my dad's friend's house, and naturally I stepped on the fence and poked my head over to see how far it had gone. I saw a man a decent distance away in the backyard, so I called out asking if he could pass my ball back over, but he wasn't responding, so I asked my sister if I was seeing it right. She looked and thought it was a scarecrow. I went to tell my dad and his friend, and they looked at it and called out, but still nothing. They jumped the fence to check it out, and it turned out I was calling out to a man who had hung himself to pass my ball back over. Few cops etc. came. That's about all there is to the story. It wasn't really scary, just creepy. I was pretty young, but it didn't really get to me or anything. I do remember it pretty decently though. Thanks so much for watching. Please subscribe and like the video if you enjoyed.